So going to the other side of the fence, we've spoken about carnivore. Is it possible to build muscle on a vegan diet?
Great question. The answer is yes. Yes, you can build muscle on a vegan diet. It's if your goal, so I always have to like unframe it out of like my mind frame, which is I want to be the most muscular, strongest human being I possibly can. And remember that not everybody is like that. In fact, most people aren't like that. They just want to build some muscle and look a little bit better and feel stronger. Sure, you can absolutely build muscle on a vegan diet. Now, will it take a little bit more wherewithal? Probably. Is it the absolute best diet for muscle building? It can be, but you have to be more targeted with it in terms of making sure you're getting enough total protein and probably trying to pump your protein quality up a little bit. For most people who are, like if they're vegans and they're bodybuilders, I'll say you're probably going to want to use some kind of isolated source of protein. It can be vegan protein, but you're going to want to probably use an isolated source of protein. And the reason being that not only is vegan sources of protein typically lower in amino acids that are anabolic promoting, like leucine, which is the amino acid that's been shown to increase muscle protein synthesis. They also, in intact sources of plant protein, it's not as bioavailable as an isolated source of protein, like a protein powder, for example, because some of the protein is bound up in the fibrous material of the plant. Now, cooking can make it more bioavailable, but typically not nearly as much as like an animal protein or an isolated source of protein. But I mean, really the big thing is if you're getting enough total protein, say 2 grams per kilogram of body weight, I mean, the research says that you're going to build as much muscle. So you can. What I would say is it's just maybe a little bit more difficult, especially on like a calorie deficit, because especially if you're trying to do all intact sources of protein, like whole food sources of protein, because now you're getting the calories from protein along with calories from carbohydrate.
Yes, because they come along for the ride. You can't isolate them as effectively as a steak or a set of eggs or whatever.
That's correct.
What are your main concerns about somebody that's on a vegan diet?
I think the main concern is I have about pretty much any diet is if you do vegan the right way, it can be very healthy. Just like if you do keto the right way, it can be very healthy, where you're using mostly unprocessed sources of food. But when you become a diet evangelist, it can become very unhealthy because you tie the identity to the vegan portion of that. And so I remember watching The Game Changers, and they're talking about all the health promoting effects of the vegan diet. And then they're showing a scene where they're like having them eat vegan chicken wings and vegan mac and cheese. And I'm like, you're missing the point here. And by the way, you can't, like, why are you trying to have it both ways here? It's either health promoting or now I'm not saying you can never have fun foods like that or anything like that. Of course, like nobody should be worried about being 100% all the time, but just like without any nuance to that.
Well, if the ideology is based around whole foods from nature, natural, et cetera, and then you try to recreate your version of the very food that you're trying to run away from or disparage,
right?
That seems to sort of turn the bar stool upside down.
Well, and keto does the same thing. Like I said, we've seen where like the ketogenic diet is not superior for fat loss if you're equating calories and protein. We have really tightly specific studies looking at that, like metabolic ward trials looking at that. Now there's keto ice creams that have more calories than regular ice creams. And it's like, no, like you're missing the point here. Like the whole point is if you do keto where you're eating like a lot of filling, satiating foods, you're going to eat less calories and you'll lose body fat. Do you really think a keto ice cream is going to help you facilitate that? Like, no. I mean, if you want a treat, but just get the regular ice cream if you want a treat, you know?
It seems to me with the vegan diet that it is practically a little bit more complex to eat it well than most other diets. I have a bunch of friends who have gone vegan for a variety of reasons and were, evangelists for that, but said in retrospect after stopping, look, I'm sure that a well-balanced vegan diet can give you everything that you need, but the level of hurdles that I needed to overcome in order to be able to hit the macronutrients that I wanted to get to, it was so restrictive that I really found that quite hard. I'm not sure if the same would be said for other diets.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Rich Roll and I actually had this kind of like discussion where he was kind of like, well, couldn't you make that argument for getting enough dietary fiber on, say, an omnivore diet? Because if you're eating more meat, maybe you're eating less fiber by default. I think any diet needs to have some mindfulness behind it. I think the thing with veganism is if you are being really strict with it, there are things that might show up that are just more apparent. Which, like, so for example, on omnivore diet, maybe you're not eating as much fiber, but you're not going to feel that difference really quickly. If you're not getting enough vitamin B12 or iron, you're going to feel that pretty quick. You know, you're like, well, in a few months, right? Because you're going to have way less energy. You're not going to feel great. But again, I think one of the tropes that I've really tried to get away from with people is like, hey, you can supplement. It's okay. You know, like just like round it out. Like if you're worried, you know, and it's like, it's funny because I had a carnivore kind of argue like, well, you couldn't eat just this food and get everything you get from steak. I'm like, why do I need to pick one food or one food group to just eat that to justify a diet? That seems like a false dichotomy to me, right? And that's what you find with a lot of these diet tribes is they have to like force these really like black and white scenarios to make their argument work. And, you know, one of the things in science is like, it's not really Occam's razor, but, you know, Occam's razor is basically like all things being equal, the hypothesis that requires the least amount of assumptions is usually true, which layman translated is the simplest answer is usually true. Also, the hypothesis that requires the most stringent protocols to prove it to be true is the flimsiest hypothesis and usually not
because
true.
you're making arbitrary rules that fit your particular priors, right? Okay.
Bingo.
What about soy? Does soy make you soy? Should we be
Soy
worried?
boy.
Yeah, should we be worried about soy?
So there was actually like, I think 2 meta-analyses done now in men looking at testosterone, showing that at least with a few servings of soy per day, no effect on testosterone or estrogen. So at least in men, it doesn't appear to do much. Now, and I don't want to get this wrong. My scientific friends, if I butcher it, please feel free to comment on this. In, I believe, premenopausal women, it has been shown to have an effect on some sex hormones. But I don't know if it's a good, bad, or neutral effect.
So it's soy girl that we actually need to be worried
Apparently.
about, not soy boy.
Apparently. But in men, doesn't seem to have an effect, at least in the, 2 to 3 servings per day range.
You've mentioned it a couple of times today. I hear this word thrown around on the internet all the time. What the fuck's bioavailability?
So basically, if you ingest a certain amount of a certain food, how much of that, of the nutrients from that, wind up in circulation? Which nutrient are you talking about?
All right. Is it as big of a deal as everyone makes out?
So, like, let's take protein, for example, right? So if I'm looking at protein bioavailability and I take in 25 grams of, say, a protein source, how much of that 25 grams actually hits circulation? How much gets absorbed through the intestinal lumen? That's really what we're talking about when it comes to bioavailability. And so it does matter. I mean, again, like we're looking at, like, if you look at certain plant sources of protein, they could be 50, 60, 70% bioavailable in the intact plant form. Like I said, cooking may take that up a little bit more. Whereas if you're looking at animal sources of protein, they're usually like 90% and up.
Eggs, steak.
Yeah. Eggs are very absorbable when they're cooked. Whey protein, very bioavailable. I believe it's almost 100%.
Have you looked at BLG protein? Beta lactoglobulin. This stuff's so cool, dude. So soccer players in Europe are using this at the moment. It allows you to get 20 grams of protein in 100 ml shot. So it
must be very soluble.
Ultra concentrated. And the reason that they're giving it to athletes that are doing power endurance or like intermittent cardio work,
issues.
Precisely.
Yep.
You are training for 4 hours a day, but you don't want to have to sink 400 ml of liquid to get your protein in. You can put 200 ml and get twice as much protein as you would have done. Really interesting. I think it's just an area that I'm kind of keeping an eye on a little bit. That beta-lactoglobulin stuff seems to be really interesting. We'll get back to talking to Layne in 1 minute, but first I need to tell you about Marek Health. I wanted to get my blood work done in America, and after I asked around, I found out that Marek Health is the most sophisticated and comprehensive service out there. I loved it so much that I actually reached out to the owner to partner with them because that's how much I believe in what they do. You might have heard that I took my testosterone from 495 to 1006 last year, and that was done with the guidance of Marek Health without putting me on TRT. Best of all, they walked me through my entire lab report and gave me actionable recommendations to improve my health and my longevity. They gave me suggestions for diet, for training, for supplementation, and if I needed them, pharmaceuticals. Basically, it's like having a super well-resourced blood expert in your corner at all times. Right now, you can get the exact same panel and medical oversight I got by going to the link in the show notes below or heading to marekhealth.com/modernwisdom and using the code modernwisdom at checkout for 10% off. That's MAREK health.com/modernwisdom and modernwisdom at checkout. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you enjoyed that clip, you will love the full-length 2-hour-long podcast with Layne, which is available right here.